Thank you so much. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Nicole Naditz, and I am your host, and we will introduce and learn more about our guests in just a moment. This program that we are about to enjoy tonight and follow up with part two next week was conceptualized and designed by the National Foreign Language Resource Center, one of 16 language resource centers in the United States. The NFLRC has worked on project-based language learning since 2015 and has produced a wealth of resources. So to learn more about the NFLRC and all of those resources, please visit nflrc.hawaii.edu. If you would like to share where you're from, joining us from, feel free to add your introductions into the chat. And as I said, I will be your host for this evening, and I'm going to get us started. Our first webinar in this two-part series both focus on the same idea: using universal design for learning to promote achievement for all with project-based language learning. And we have an overarching question that kind of guides these conversations. In what ways can universal design for learning support achievement in high quality project-based language learning and provide compelling and equitable experiences for learners? So before we dive into the universal design for learning, or UDL portion, let's do a quick review of high quality project-based language learning, or HQ-PBLL. Project-based language learning has the potential to be highly multidisciplinary. Even though this is an important affordance of PBL, it can also be a significant constraint if educators from different disciplines don't have a common understanding of what a high quality project is. So in order to facilitate a multidisciplinary approach to PBL in world languages, the NFLRC chose to base much of its work on PBLL on the conceptual framework created by PBL Works, which is likely to be the implementation and professional development model for PBL adopted by schools or school districts that deeply integrate project-based learning into their practices. Taking advantage of this existing framework gives world language teachers a common vocabulary to design and develop projects with colleagues in other disciplines. It also gives them a shared vision for quality projects and creates opportunities to design multidisciplinary projects where the world language component is as strong in terms of learning and engagement as the components in the other academic areas that are part of the project. Because of this, the NFLRC chose not to create a new framework for PBL for languages, but rather strengthen existing ones by providing a world language perspective to the design and implementation of quality projects. The NFLRC has been actively engaged in conversations about PBL and was represented in the initial group that created the high quality project-based learning framework. That framework provides 6 main components of a high quality project-based learning experience. Those components are that each experience includes significant intellectual challenge and accomplishment, meaning that students learn deeply, think critically, and strive for excellence across the content areas. These projects also provide authenticity. Students work on projects that are meaningful and relevant to their cultures, their lives, and their futures. There is also a public product component. Students' work is real, it's publicly displayed, discussed, and critiqued. I like to call this having a purpose greater than a grade and an audience beyond the teacher. High quality project-based learning also includes collaboration, where students collaborate with other students in person or online, or they might receive guidance from adult mentors and experts. There is also work around project management, where students use a project management process that enables them to proceed effectively from the project initiation all the way through to its completion. And finally, high quality project-based learning includes a reflection component where students reflect on their work and their learning throughout the project. So what is universal design for learning? We're going to be very general right now because you will probably have a much deeper sense of what we mean by universal design for learning once you meet our guests and hear all about their amazing work. Plus, some of you have probably listened to the podcast episodes and also done other work in this area. But to be very general, universal design for learning, or UDL, is an approach to the design of learning experiences, including the practice activities and the assessments that the students will do, that starts with the students' known or predictable variabilities. By planning for these in advance with clear learning goals, the lessons are automatically differentiated from the outset. This is in contrast to other approaches to differentiation, where teachers differentiate after students have already had difficulties or challenges that now need to be corrected or addressed. By using universal design for learning approaches to design for students' needs from the beginning, to anticipate those needs and plan for those needs, we prevent many of the struggles before they can occur. And we achieve one of the primary goals of UDL, which is ensuring that every learner can be an expert learner in all grades and subjects. So now I am thrilled to introduce you to our two exceptional educators and accomplished practitioners of both project-based language learning and universal design for learning, which we will discuss more in this session. Together, during this two-part webinar, we will explore how embedding UDL strategies for engagement, representation, and action and expression supports high-quality project-based language learning and ultimately fosters the success of each learner. Ana Chavez and Luz Ramirez are both graduates of San Jose State University. They currently teach at James Lick High School in San Jose, California. Both have taught Spanish for non-native speakers, as well as heritage speakers and AP Spanish language. Ana and Luz are also active members of the Berkeley World Language Project, where they serve as lead facilitators. They have presented on project-based learning in the world language classroom with an emphasis on social emotional learning. Ana and Luz are both committed to students' wellness as they guide their students to reach proficiency through Spanish language and culture. Thank you both so much for joining us. Yay. And is there anything else you would each like to add about yourselves that I may not have captured?
No, thank you.
We're excited to be here.
Very much so.
We are so happy that you're here. I'm really excited. I've gotten a sneak peek at the work that they are about to share with all of you today, so I am super excited. So in fact, I do want to start by giving our guests a chance to share an example of an HQPBLL, or high quality project-based language learning experience, that they facilitated for their learners. So this is going to focus on the project-based learning aspect. And then we will start in this webinar and continue in the next webinar, really digging into how they used UDL to make this possible for their learners.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole.
Of course. Just let me know when you want me to change the slides.
For sure. Yeah, so a little bit about our school, the school at James Lick here in San Jose that we work at. We work with mainly, we only have a Spanish program, and we have two strands, a non-native and the heritage speaker. So this project, the Dia de los Muertos project we're going to share with you right now, really is emphasizing heritage speakers and Spanish 3. So these two classes come together. All heritage speakers take part in this project, but specifically these two groups, the non-native Spanish 3 and the heritage speaker. The Spanish 3 are 11th grader, the heritage speakers are our incoming freshmen. So in this project, a little bit about Dia de los Muertos. It's a big cultural event in Mexico, very religious in nature, but also very cultural and festive. And many times in the past, before Ana and I would do PBL at all, our projects were mainly what we call in the PBL world dessert projects, right? Where they're beautiful and they're colorful and they just go out and they hang somewhere and that is it. No one else sees them. It's just us, maybe their classmates inside the class, their own members, but it stays there. So the goal with PBL and high quality PBL specifically is to really make sure that it is the main meal, like the main course meal. And that is what this project is. So if we go to our next slide, we start with the beginning. We begin with the end in mind. So by the end of this project, we want our students to be able to recognize perspectives of this festivity and really dig into the perspectives, not only of themselves and the Mexican community, but also others' perspectives, and be able to communicate these. So it's really important that we start with that. At the end, by the end of this project, we want them to really know and be able to communicate in Spanish. So that's where we start. So what do we do with this project? Well, we first start with a project launch. So we send a letter home. We send a letter to our parents, both in English and in Spanish. English to our non-native speakers and Spanish to our heritage speakers students, letting the parents know about this project. And this is our entry event. Think of it as the hook, or almost the setting the stage. And although this letter is geared towards the parents, we read it in class as well to go over what is this all about. So we let parents know we will be having a festival and your child will be participating in this project. Again, our intent is for them to learn about and recognize perspectives of this big event in Mexico. So let us know if you're okay or if you need a second option, because many students for religious reasons choose not to participate, and that's okay. Parents do know that they will have options, so they will not just not be part of it, but they'll do a different option, still taking part of the history and the culture and really learning as they move forward, just not taking part essentially in the altar making. We show a video. We won't show the video, but it's a video of the previous festivals at our school. We have a big festival in October, Dia de los Muertos festivals, and this is what we use to get our students hooked to this project. It is a festival. Community members will be coming to our school on this weekend, and we will have everyone from board members, we will have parents, we will have students, alumni, entire East San Jose is coming to our school on this day. So we get them hooked up and we get them excited, and also talking to them, what do we know about Dia de Muertos? Do you practice Dia de Muertos in your own home? Do you have a special ceremony or something that you do in your own home? Getting them hooked, first of all. Second, if we go to the next slide. Yeah, it's also getting them, making our students know what makes Dia de los Muertos, the altar specifically, right? The main product in the altares. And we talk about these, and they also take a stand of like, what are these different elements or components of an altar? What makes it authentic? What makes it rich? And we just have different activities at the beginning of the project to really delve into this. Now, before PBL or Dia de Muertos project, it would probably take about a couple days, right? 3, 4, maybe 5 days, a week, maybe, if at all. But with this new model and this new approach, this project, it's a whole month, 4 to 6 weeks. So yeah, so you might be thinking, wow, 4 weeks talking of Dia de, how does this? But no, it's a lot more, because you really go into the food and the decorations and art, and you're really standing yourself out to different disciplines, and not just the language culture, but really bringing disciplines in to investigate and really get deep into these topics. So again, right now the students, they know there's a festival, they know they're going to participate. So it's just like spreading those crumbs at the beginning. And this could be a few weeks, a few days, a week of just really digging deep into the Dia de Muertos. Next, as we move further into the project, now that they're starting to get the language, more of the concepts, more of the products through various activities. Now it's time to really get them to break out of their individual shell, right? And really start bringing things together collectively. Now, for this part, we create a team contract, and we'll tell you more about how that works and start designing a plan because we give them the driving question. So the driving question is, how can we bring an authentic experience of the altar to our festival? How can we do that as a class? How can we do that as a whole heritage speaking course here at James Lake? And they do. They begin by creating an action plan. They begin also getting a team contract where they have to hold themselves accountable and responsibilities. And first things first, contact. How do you want to communicate with your classmates? And deciding what part of the altar you want to be part of. What part? And remember, it's not just the craft, but it's deeper, right? It's the decorations. And remember, they're going to be sharing this with the community, the decorations, the crafts, the Mexican crafts, the food, the connection to food, the different types of foods, the colors. So really getting into color schemes and the meaning of color and even the telas, right? The fabrics and the papel picado and the items and the photos and everything. So once they do that, now we give them, this is towards the middle of the project, now we let them know, like, guys, this is it. Like there's no festival if you're not part of it. There's no festival because the altar it's a big part of the festival. Now this festival comes together with different departments at our school. The art department comes in, the music department comes in. Everyone comes in to make this festival happen, right? The upperclassmen come in with their own take on the festival, but we as heritage speakers, we come in the altar making exposition of the festival. So in teams, they begin to design and they begin to come up with plans of how is their altar going to look. And this is the altar for every class. So there's period 1's altar, period 2, period 3, and every class needs to come together and vote, well, who is it going to be dedicated to? And we come to a whole voting process. Now, voting is a whole scenario, right? It's a whole scenario of getting our students to know that they have a voice and that they need to get the voice out so that we can all come to an agreement, a consensus. So everyone in the room, all 27, all 30 of our students have a vote and have a say. And then we look at patterns in our votes, right? Because many students, they want to dedicate it possibly to an artist or maybe a musician, or they probably want to do beloved ones, right? Like family members. So then we start looking at patterns and getting them to think of like, we need to come to an agreement. So all of us need to agree on who this altar for this class is going to be dedicated to. Once we do that, we start designing and kids start putting their altars together. This was pre-COVID. It was out in the quad. Now within COVID, we brought it into a more ventilated area. And the next picture shows some of our altars, final products. Now this is, again, this is the final phase of the project, the putting it together. And all the teams that are in charge, there's a lot of thinking, like what goes first? What goes next? You need to speak before you put the food. You need to go speak to the decoration committee and find out what they're bringing in. And the decoration committee, you need to speak to the photograph and image committee. And the design committee, you need to come and present to the entire class so that we all know what we're going to do. So through this process, everyone's always taking a part in what they're going to do and expressing and always coming to a consensus. This is huge in PBL and project management, and having freshmen know that they have a voice and that they can express that and come to a consensus. It's huge, that in itself. Also getting the juniors, the upperclassmen, come in and be more of like the role, like the upperclassmen, and communicating that in the language is also super cool to see. And they learn from each other, right? They learn from each other. They learn from the people that they want to dedicate it to. And they also learn from the whole process. And of course, every team is in charge. Every team is responsible for making sure that their altar is communicated to the community. The writing piece, the presentation piece, everything comes together neatly. And then comes the big day, right? The big presentation day where kids come, they invite their families, and everyone is there presenting their big proyectos to the community.
Luz, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a couple of questions, so I don't want to get too far away from these slides before we ask them. One had to do with voting. It's probably a pretty quick answer. How does the voting take place? Openly, as in raise your hands, or anonymously in writing?
No, it's a vote openly. So in the class, we have them raise their hand. At the beginning, we have them write down anonymously. And then once we start reading the choices, they raise their hand.
Okay,
and then we start grouping them. It can get a little heated because students are like, no, we want Selena. And it's like, no, this one here was for Cantinflas, a Mexican. Yeah, it's Cantinflas, right? Yeah. No, Cepillín, right? El payaso. So many students, they have to come, no. And all of this coming back and forth deciding, well, we're getting an artist. Well, we're getting an artist too. How about, we did it last year. The last year's team did it. So all of this is really helping them come to a consensus, which is huge. So by paper first, anonymously, like who do you think it should be dedicated to? And then, okay, let's see. And these are the groupings, let's vote. And that's how we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Sorry, thank you. So along with that, just how Luz mentioned right now that we do it both paper, and then we kind of start narrowing it down. Because we do it with all 5 of our classes, we start writing it down, like period 1 has this person, so you can no longer pick this person, period 2, this person, and so on and so forth. We also have a combined class where we combine Spanish 3 and our heritage speakers class. So this year it was actually kind of funny. We ended up picking, for that day, for some reason we couldn't combine our classes. So we were each in our own classroom. And the good thing is that we're right next to each other. Sometimes I kind of wish we could take down our wall, and that would make it easier and not have to go to another classroom where we have more space. But for some reason, our classes ended up picking the same person. Yeah, and we were able to, and when we voted, like from the top 2, we had the common one and then the other one. And it's funny because when we ended up kind of voting, like raise your hand or thumbs up, whatever, we ended up picking the same person, and it was like around the same votes too.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was kind of cool. So that's the way that we do it. We do it through, first they write it out, and then we start narrowing it down, and then we say this period already has this period already has so-and-so, and then that's how we move forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other question we got revolves around, as they're doing the work and the planning and the preparation and the debating of what they're going to put in and not include, and talking with the other teams and so on, do the students speak Spanish and or English? And how do you as instructors support and monitor the students to speak Spanish?
Well, during this process, a lot of more of the protocols, right, like the critical friends where they're giving each other feedback, they're more monitor and formative assessments. So that's where we really structure sentence starters and making sure that they're staying in a dialogue, right? But when they're open and just having their own, when they get in the flow of things, speak the language that they want. That's important because their brain is doing the processing and the thinking, and so they can speak in English when they're doing all of that flow thinking, like when they get lost and they start researching and doing the activities. But the more structure formative, then that's where we provide with them guidelines and form and sentence starters and frames so that they can stay in the Spanish language. Because even though these are heritage speakers, that's the label, that's their theme, right? Heritage speakers, but they're very novice. So they really don't fully have a full-on Spanish conversation because they're very, very novice. They are labeled heritage speakers, but really they're really novice, maybe dad, maybe mom, maybe grandma, grandpa is a heritage speaker. They themselves are very novice level Spanish speakers for sure. Yeah, so they need a lot of structure, and the Spanish 3 non-native also need it. So together they combine really beautifully in this part for sure.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm going to bring you to your next slide. There we go.
yeah.
Oh, do you want me, if you want me to play this, I'm going to stop sharing quickly and reshare correctly for video.
Oh, sure.
Okay, give me a second. You can start talking if you'd like. I'm just going to switch the sharing settings around.
Yeah, so we'll just, it's a 5-minute video. This is the video we will, from this year, that we will use next year to hook the students, right, for the festival 2021. It's a 5-minute video. We don't have to watch the entire thing, but you can just play to see the images of what everything that comes together so beautifully.
Sure. Sure. Do you want me to go ahead and press play now?
Play it, yeah.
Okay.
And
what color is the sky? Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. You tell me that it's red. Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. Where should I put my shoes? Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. You say put them on your head. Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. You make me un poco loco, un poquitito loco. The way you keep me guessing, I'm nodding and I'm yesing. Now count it as a blessing that I'm only un poco loco.
That you make me, it is just un poco crazy, the sense that you're not making.
The liberties you're taking leaves my cabeza shaking. You are just un poco loco.
yeah.
I wish we had time to show the whole thing. This is awesome.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so this is the video that we will show them next year, right, to show them. But that's how it comes together. The students are there. It's a really beautiful thing to see it all come together, and knowing that what many of our students know as dessert projects, just a small ofrenda or a small project. Now it's a full-blown, really multifaceted experience for them. And sure enough, at the end of the year, during the reflection, this is one of the projects they remember as most endearing to them, for sure.
And the connections with the other subject areas are really powerful as well, so that there's this really cohesive sense that this is a community that we've created here, and everybody's bringing their expertise and their passions to it.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
We had a suggestion and a question. So for practicing that self-reflection in Spanish, you might already be doing this, but one of our participants was saying, I wonder if students could present a brief summary in Spanish at the end of their decision-making process to practice that kind of self-reflection piece. And the question, who creates the festival video? Is that also part of the project-based language learning experience?
Yes, this is our upperclassmen, so the AP language students. They're in charge of the actual, bringing the vendors in, bringing other people, the artists, because there's performers. So they're part of the logistic part. So they know that the festival is composed of different parts. We are part of the exposition because we want them to be able to expose and really express what they learned about Dia de Muertos, setting the stage. And then we tell them next year, when you go to level 2, guess what? You will now be taking part of the running the show behind the scenes, right? So they take care of the video making.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
hold on. You know how this goes. Whenever you do a video, it plays itself over. All right. Hold on. Perfect. So I think we're going to hear a little bit about another project as well. This is a food and identity project. So I'm going to just flip it over to the start of that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Anna?
Yeah, so we're gonna be looking at our second project that in a way is a segue to our Dia de los Muertos celebration, because we are now going to continue talking about food. And the reason why I say it's connected to Dia de los Muertos is because part of those altares is the food and the importance of food. As we go into this project, we begin to analyze a little bit of how is it that food represents us and our identity. We take emphasis a lot that first year of heritage speakers on who they are. So their freshman year, if most of our heritage speakers with that first level are freshmen, some sophomores, and then sprinkled out like juniors and seniors. But we do a lot of emphasis on identity. So my festivities, so in this case, we do Dia de los Muertos. Food is also a big part, I feel like, of everyone's identity. So it's a good segue, a good connection into this unit. And this is the way that we end our first semester. If you can go on to the next slide. So again, just as we do for all of our projects, all of our units, we begin with the end in mind. At the end of this unit or project, the purpose is for the students to think about perspectives. So the ingredients, why, how they came about, what was their purpose, what was the idea behind them, and then of course connections, and then communication. And then you'll see why this one also helps for that communication part. Next one. So our project launch that we begin with, so for Dia de los Muertos, we started off with a letter and then the video of the festival. This one we talk about, which again, I really like the connection, how these two units, these two projects overlap. Frida Kahlo was very connected to this whole idea of Dia de los Muertos. We talk about a little bit about her life, how she almost died at a very young age with that tragic accident that she had. So she always had this connection to death where she felt like she should have died pretty much. So she also talks about through this book how death, how some of her, we're gonna see one of her recipes coming up, about the tamales and how the tamales look, she makes a connection to, there we go, tamales de calabaza. So the reason why we use her book is that this book talks about her favorite recipes. And then along with having her recipes, she also has a brief summary on top. So where it says las recetas de mi nana. She gives a brief explanation of how this recipe connects to something in her life. So something in her past. In this case, she talks about mi nana. So she makes that connection of either what she was listening to or who she was there with. She talks about her apple pies when she was in New York living with Diego Rivera. So she has all these different connections to her life and food. And then of course, another connection to Dia de los Muertos is el pan de muertos, so the day of the dead bread. Again, she gives us a little background story that connects to something, and then she gives us her actual recipe and how she would make it. If we could go on to the next one. And then we have our question, our driving question. So how does what we eat say about who we are, or how does that connect to our identity? So we start looking at this idea of what do we know and what do we need to know based on what we already saw, and what we saw with Dia de los Muertos, how food is such a big important part, a big important component to it. And then we start off with our driving question, and then we start plugging in essential questions. So just to clarify a little bit of what's the difference. So driving question is your overall umbrella, and then your essential questions are the ones that are going to help you understand or guide your inquiry process, your questions that you have throughout your project. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So here are our day-to-day activities for this unit. Just how Luz mentioned earlier, how we do, we sprinkle in some information. We do a couple of interpretive readings. We listen to her audio, giving that different, for our different learners. And so we do interpretive reading. We do different videos that talk about the celebration, and we listen to Frida Kahlo's audiobook. And again, the recipes. We then start talking about their own favorite dish, so that we can now start connecting it to them. So we ask them what are the ingredients of that favorite dish? How do they connect to different parts of the world? We started talking about, for example, things that came from ingredients that came from Spain and how they got here. The ingredients that we already had here, for example, el cacao from Mexico, or back then it was called Tenochtitlan, the spices, and then other ingredients from Asia. So just how they all connect and how they connect us to the world. Then we have, of course, our formative assessments throughout our projects that, like Luz mentioned from the other Dia de los Muertos, they help us understand or help the students stay within that target language, which in our case, it's Spanish, by doing different interpersonal activities. Again, we give them sentence frames, we give them vocabulary, things that we don't want to set them up for failure. So we want to make sure that they feel supported, especially when we're trying to make them feel comfortable with using the target language. Then we go on with creating those team contracts. In this case, we also used a binder so that they could kind of keep their stuff together in groups, team agreements, and what they are. And then we carry on with that knows and need to knows process, that will help them guide their final project. In this case, what they do is they select a country, a specific country. It doesn't have to be Spanish speaking. They pick a specific country. So we already looked at what's their favorite dish, what are those ingredients, what is the history behind those ingredients, and then we bring it out to, in a way, the community. So how does it connect? How do we connect to others through this, through these dishes? So at the end, what they do is that they start, we also have team conferences. So the facilitator, or me, the teacher, also the facilitator, I go ahead and meet with the specific group, again, to help them in whatever it is that they may have questions, or if they need extra support. We have small conferences or small meetings so that we can better support. Then we go ahead and do what is called a role play. This will help them understand and kind of get the feel of when they're going to do their actual presentation. So again, we use this as a formative assessment. And then, of course, we do the actual presentation day, where we have members from our school or our community come into our classrooms, and then our students throughout this process, they create a video in which they record themselves making the food. They talk about the ingredients, they respond to the driving question. And the day of the presentation, they bring in their dish, they bring in their video. So when they present, they will talk about their dish and how it represents that country and why it represents that country. And then our community members come in, they judge the plate. Prior to COVID, we actually had our judges taste the food to see how authentic it was. But now with COVID, this year that we were back in the classroom, we had them still bring in their dish, but it was more judging the presentation of it and how it looked like. And so it was more of that. Of course, we could still smell it, even though we had our mask on, especially when there's tend to be like fishy smells. Those tend to be a little bit stronger. So it was more of that this time around than actually tasting it. And then, of course, we do the celebrations and then the award and reflection. And then if we can continue on to the next couple of slides, we're going to just see a couple of pictures of our of what it looks like when they bring in their presentation. So this is how we start off the day of the presentation. We say, bienvenidos a nuestra cocina. And then if we can go on to the next slides. So these are examples of what the dishes look like. Each group is divided. Again, each dish is divided amongst a group. They pick their country, and then they pick what that dish, what they want to make. So they have to, the idea or the expectation is that they're going to make this dish twice. They make it for their video, and then they make it for the actual presentation. We're on a cross, and I use myself as an example. Which my dad, when I was in high school, did not like me going to other people's houses. So we still have that situation where students are like, can I do it by myself, or, whatever it is. So yes, we do give them that option. Either they do it by themselves, or the group figures it out, where I will cook one part of it and do my part of the video, and then you do your other part of the video, and then we'll just put it together. So they eventually figure it out where they could make it work. Or again, we do give them that option because we don't want their effective filter to go up there. We do give them that option of don't worry, you can do it by yourself, even if it's the same dish, because they at least helped each other inside the class. They supported each other to do the research. They could do their own video at home. And then, of course, some parents are okay with, yes, sure, we'll work together. And then they can they come together and create their video. If we go to the next slide.
Hold on. We have a few questions.
Yeah. Yes.
So the first one, and I actually agree with this. You did such a great job with this part. So we've had a request to please explain the difference between the driving question and the essential question again.
Yeah, so the driving question, the way that we have learned it is that your driving question is, think of it as your umbrella that drives your whole unit. And then your essential questions are kind of like your little questions that guide your research process.
Inquiry.
So your inquiry. So for example, how does food represent who I am or my identity? And then an essential question would be, how does the ingredients from Spain come to be, or so you're more specific about it, as opposed to the driving question is more, like I said, like an umbrella. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And then I was typing the answer to one and I accidentally typed the wrong word. So for the question that was, do the students have to pick a Spanish speaking country or any country? I meant to type any country, but I accidentally typed any question. So the answer from what you said, Anna, if I'm not mistaken, was they can choose any country. So they can go into their own heritage or a country of particular interest to them.
Correct. At first, we would stick to Spanish speaking countries. And then in the recent years, we've opened it up to, because it makes sense, especially for our combined class where we have our Spanish 3s, where we have Filipinos, we have Asian students, so that we want to make sure we open it up to everyone and it's just not Spanish speaking countries. Yeah.
And then is there a budget allocated for the ingredients?
That we provide for the students, or?
Like, yeah, do you give them, I think the question was, do you give them a budget that they need to stick to?
No, we don't.
Okay.
And we try to provide as much as we can. And we do say, if you do need help with anything, we're here for them. We want to make
Okay.
sure that they feel supported. So if for some reason they can't come up with something, we can provide it for them.
Perfect. So that kind of the person type of follow-up question, does the school give them money? Not necessarily money, but you'll make sure that they have what they need to prepare.
Yes, and even we even gave them the option of using our kitchen at the school. And of
Hmm.
course we're there present while they're doing their cooking videos. So if for some reason, because we've heard it, right? My mom doesn't want me using the stove because blah blah blah, or
Right.
whatever that situation may be, right? That's, we have students that have multiple families at their home, so they don't really have that easy access to the stove. So we gave them that option also to say, hey, you have the option. Here are the time slots that the kitchen is available for us here at James Lick. Sign up, let us know, and we'll provide that support or that service also.
And how do you address potential food allergies such as nuts or a nut oil among the students?
So yes, so that's a big thing. We do make sure to explain that allergies exist, that people do have allergies, so that we need to be very specific of our hygiene also, that we need to make sure we wash
Mhm.
utensils. If we're using fish, if we're using chicken, that everything has to be clean before and after use.
Yep.
So we are pretty good about explaining that
It's an
there's
additional cross-disciplinary.
yes, so all that we try to make sure to explain. Of course, we're working with kids. There was a time, I know Luz has mentioned that one of her students one time left raw meat in their backpack.
Oh.
It was in a bag, but nonetheless it was raw, and they forgot to take it out. So it lived there for a couple of days, and
Ooh,
yeah. So we, we
lesson
also have
learned.
yes, so that's how we learn. That's how they learn also.
Yeah.
But we try to support them as best as we can. We let them know you have to be specific. You have to say that if there's nuts, oils, whatever.
Good. Yeah.
Now we go into like the vegetarian, gluten-free.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that we are catering and making sure that we explain our ingredients well,
Mhm.
and how for some that are allergic to different types of ingredients.
And did students need scaffolding for the interpretive reading, or were the recipes in the book easy for them to understand?
So yeah, so we do. I believe it's part of it. So later down in one of the slides, we do have reading strategies, and then we also use the audio, so that they have that audio, and we do an activity where that also helps to understand the readings, where they listen to the audio and they have to interpret what is it that they are what is it that they are imagining in their head. So they paint their own picture based off of what they are reading. What they are listening to, and then of course we give them the reading strategies, so that we either highlight, we annotate off the side, we look for specific cognates, specific vocabulary, as we're doing those readings.
Thank you. And just a note for all of our attendees, you might see gray boxes. That happens every time I open up the question answer panel or the chat. I try not to open anything until you've had a chance to look at the slide that's on the screen, because I know it's going to block your view. And then the panels go away as soon as I'm able to close those question and answer items or the chat. And then we're just continuing on with the pictures from your project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these are just more examples. This it's on my bottom right. I don't know what it looks like on yours, but this is actually our kitchen.
Oh, yes.
The kind of like the silver one. Oh, and there's also a top one.
Yes.
So this is our kitchen at James Lick. So this is a group, and if you can tell, they have their mask on. So this was this year.
Yep.
So this is the example that we support them as best as we can. And then on the other pictures, we see where they've presented. They don't have a mask on, so these are from previous years, where we have our our students ready. They brought their food. And then we have our panelists that join us.
And it looks like maybe the rubrics are visible for like scoring.
Yes,
the food.
yes.
Is that what I'm seeing on the table?
That is correct. They have rubrics. We give them to the judges. And the students are also aware of what they're being judged on. And then if you can see, there's also that yellow paper in the middle. So those are the questions that the judges ask the students. Again, they get these questions, they get vocabulary, they get the opportunity to role play so that they are prepared for the presentation. And then if we go on to the next slide, these are just examples of, there you have Miss Ramirez or Luz, in one of them. She actually came to judge one of my periods. So she was able to taste their pupusas. And again, this was prior to COVID. They have their Chromebooks where they are showing their videos. And then we have the other one where they do have the mask. So that was this year. We try to be as playful as we can. Also, if you can notice that one of the students is wearing a chef hat. Some kids bring aprons. We provide the table covers for them. We provide the paper plates if they need forks. So we try to support them as best as we can also. And then if we can continue on to the next couple of slides. And again, this is just more examples of what they look like. Again, this was prior to COVID. All of our judges have been Spanish speakers. So they understand the language also. The idea is for them to stay in the target language when they are presenting. And then if you go on to the next slide, sorry, not the last slide yet. So we have, at the end of the project, we figure out who gets first, second, and third place. So based on their rubric, based on what the judges say, we come together and we pick that winner. So they each get a ribbon, the third, second, and first, and then they also get a utensil representing the staff of the kitchen. And then the keys below, those are our school pillars that we go by. We have collaboration, so colaboración, comunicación, communication. Iniciativa propia is their agency. And then mentalidad de crecimiento is growth mindset. So these are overall, how did you do? And each one student gets one of the keys from, or in this case, sorry, 4 keys are given out per class. And that's what we do for these projects. And I believe that's concludes for this project as well.
And that brings us right back to our question and answer, which we have some questions waiting for you.
Yes.
Earlier, you said that the projects take several weeks. How do you combine the projects with the curriculum? If you can very briefly talk about how that happens.
Yes, well, we decide, first of all, the project is the curriculum, right?
Yep.
So we know based on what we want them to be able to achieve at the end, all of the activities are designed towards that. So that's how we combine. Also, our heritage program, we already have a framework, right, of certain themes that we need to touch on before they go, so they have exposure to the AP theme. Yes. So that's how we design our units, making sure that we're tapping into those various themes that they need to be exposed to for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can add to that.
Yes, please.
Sorry. If I just really quick, these 2 projects that we just mentioned can be seen at each level. You just have to kind of play with the driving question or kind of look at our standards and look at what we have to cover, but these can be seen at each level. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, and I see too with them, people might be thinking more discreetly about curriculum when they ask this question. And there were definitely connections. For example, in the first in the first project, there was that whole chart that showed these like 8 aspects that they were going to be looking at for Dia de los Muertos. And those aspects touched on things that we typically teach in year 1, 2, or 3 classes, right? So it's a chance to either review or introduce some of that thematic content vocabulary, put it in a cultural context that's rich. You know, as you already said, really making connections so that all of the linguistic content that we might think of in a language class is contextualized within an authentic and meaningful cultural context for why it is they're learning about these words, these phrases, these ways of talking and writing, for what we need, these sentence stems and frames and structures that we need in order to ultimately do this final presentation at the end. There's a real context behind that. One of the other questions was some of the work in various stages of the project done outside of class time, for example, cooking or student and teacher team conferences.
Mainly the cooking, yeah, they had to do it outside of class. Team conferences are during class. Sometimes they'll sign up to come after school, but mainly during class. So there will be a period. Unfortunately, our school doesn't have block schedule. I love block schedule, but that's not our environment. Our school is a traditional 50-minute, 55-minute period. So during any given week, during the phases of the project, we'll schedule in this period is dedicated for team conferences.
Perfect. This question we probably are going to get much more detailed answer to as we dive into the UDL portion starting today and continuing next week. But how do you address and include students' special needs in these projects?
For sure. It's definitely looking at where they are, what they can do, and then bringing it to them so we can move them forward. So that's really the idea, to really see and get to know them, know what are their assets, what they do, and then go from there and move them forward. That's
And
really
we'll talk a lot about that predictable variability and kind of designing for it in order to make sure we have supports in place.
yeah.
Perfect. We just had a comment in the questionnaire that this participant just really loved the ribbons, and what a great idea that was. And then the last question that we have is, what kind of assessment tool or tools are used in these projects? And I think we're looking at, for example, for you to get some kind of way of documenting their interpretive proficiency, their presentational, their interpersonal. What kinds of assessment tools do you use?
We use the rubrics. We use also their notebooks that they turn in, their team binders. And at our school, we use our LMS is Canvas. So that's where we document everything, their journal entries, their interpersonal recordings. Everything goes on our LMS or Canvas, a learning management system. But a notebook, a team binder, rubrics, and the LMS.
Thank you. So we're going to now start shifting and talking first a little bit, and I see a typo and I'm very tempted to take down my slide deck and fix it, but I won't. We're going to talk a little bit about language learning, and high quality project-based language learning, which should have 2 L's at the end. And so I have some questions for both of you. You can take them in whichever order, whoever would like to speak first, and one person can start and another can add on. Are you, for even just one of the projects, could you share what some of the learning targets were for each mode of communication for the project?
Yeah, I'll gladly do that. If we go to the next slide, the learning targets, we were clear from the beginning, right? Interpretive, we really want them to identify products, practices, and perspectives of Dia de Muertos, right? And hone into those perspectives and stereotypes and just cultural awareness overall. Speaking is just, we want them to be able to exchange and be able to engage in a conversation. That's it, right? And what's important to them and why, and just exchange preferences, be able to engage. And that's in the interpersonal piece. And of course, presentational, identify these products, make those connections, and be able to write, because they're also writing through this process about their inquiry. and also the final product, right? The biographical statement about the deceased person, and be able to present using the past tense, right? What was done in the past. Many of our students at this level, they still get confused with antes, the preterite or the imperfect, and they need to know that. So in presentational, that was our focus. And during our day-to-day activities, a big part of our formative assessment is around those areas. Can you exchange? Can you write? Can you identify? And that's how we go. And we use the same thought process even for the food project, same idea.
Perfect. Yes, exactly. There you go. The slide should be there soon.
And every project, we always want to make sure that we increase. So now that you're identifying, now you can contribute. Now you can go a little deeper. And the idea is that every project gives them an opportunity to increase, right, or up a little bit, and also increasing their confidence in the language and just feeling more confident in their language.
Anna, did you want to add anything regarding your learning targets?
That and
Oops.
then I don't know
Sorry.
if I don't know if Luz mentioned that and I think this is coming up in the next question, how we really look at what our students or
Yes.
class brings, and so that we could fully support what their needs are as best as we can. I'm not sure if Luz mentioned this also, that we bring in, for example, the ACTFL standards also, so the I can statements. And so that's what we look at, and we want to make sure that we use all three modes of communication in each unit that we cover.
So really intentional about which learning targets you're selecting.
Yes. Yeah.
And then how did learners build the language skills necessary to achieve those targets? Because sometimes they can get lost in a project and kind of just focus on, almost focusing on that final outcome, and really needing to be given the patience and the support to take their time and actually really work with the language as well. So how did they build the language skills necessary?
It definitely has to do with the day-to-day activities and the structures and plays. So during any given phase in the project, there's always something that we need to meet by the end of this week. So we need to do that, because yes, it can get easy for them to get lost and like, okay, we're presenting, but no, it's like today's focus. Let's go back. Remember, our classes are only 55 minutes. So it's very critical that every day we begin with the focus, and then just having them come back to our main question or our driving question. And what is the focus for today? El enfoque del día, today. So bringing them back to present, today. Yes, you have a huge project, but today, this is our focus. And these are some examples of just knows and need to knows everyday activities where we're guiding the inquiry of the students. So again, on this given day, students, the goal of today is to come up with those questions. What do we know and what do we need to know? What do we want to know to be able to complete this presentation?
I like how it appears that they add to this throughout the course of the project. So their list of what they know is growing, I think.
Yeah.
I think they build on it over the course of the project. And as they get more knowledgeable, what typically happens is we have new questions that we just didn't think to ask before.
Yeah.
So they have more questions too, because now they're driving their own learning by having enough interest in the topic to want to pose these questions.
For sure. And also in the past, it would be me, the teacher, telling them, well, the difference between Dia de Muertos and Halloween is this. I would tell them. And now, no, it's like they come up like, and if you notice here, one of the students wrote, how is the Day of the Dead different from Halloween? And they did it in English. And that was okay, because that was their thinking process, and they wanted to express that, and it was okay. And we just present to them, well, how do we say this? Remember our question phrases, but we don't limit them. It's their thinking that's really important, and then start developing and communicating in the language. But that is critical. That's huge. And then day-to-day activities. If we go to the next slide also,
Yes.
the reading strategies. So this is a really neat handout that we've given our students where we just teach them the different strategies to be able to interact with the reading and sentence starters, purpose, and just getting them to really use these anytime we do a reading. And
Nice.
sometimes it can be as simple as today we're going to focus on just summarizing, or today we're just going to focus on making connections and practicing different ways of making connections in a reading, or visualizing and tapping into the different intelligences and different learning styles of our students. So that's an example of that. If we go to the next one, you'll see also the examples of interpretive reading, right? A lot of guided structure and a lot of one-on-one support also.
hmm And then the products practices, the work with the interculturality.
Just the whole concept of the different products and practices and getting them thinking deeply about these. It's not just the school, right? What about the
Mhm.
school? What is it used for? And just getting them to dig deep. You can definitely see for those of you that have done Dia de Muertos, right? There's a big difference between taking on this approach and just doing the pretty project at the end. Because that's what it is.
Absolutely.
It's really pretty and colorful and
hmm
wonderful to look at, but there's just so much more when you take this approach, in my opinion, for sure.
And I think the students show, because of the work that they're doing all along, they have a greater capacity to talk about what Dia de los Muertos is and what it means to people on their own in Spanish,
Mhm.
as a result of all of the opportunities that they've had to kind of dig into it, engage in inquiry around it, talk about it themselves, write about it themselves, and then, of course, ultimately engage in an authentic experience of actually honoring somebody.
Mhm.
So we're going to, let me take a quick look at the questions here that we have. Um, do you align your project's language objectives with the oral proficiency interview standards?
The interview standards.
And
Plus,
probably you might not be doing that specifically.
if it's maybe interpersonal, is that
And presentational speaking, but there you don't use the OPI rubrics and so on for
No,
those.
we don't.
And then did your students create the ribbons or did you order them?
No, we make them. So they don't know. It's a surprise. It's a surprise.
Right.
And it's a surprise, and they get really all just excited over this token of achievement. And over the years, we've done this project for a few years now. We collect them, and we don't collect them. We kind of have a surplus of Dollar Tree ribbon and Dollar Tree utensils, so they're there. So it's really neat. The following year, it's like, oh, I have it from last year, and there's stuff that I can use again. But it makes a big
Mhm.
difference. The celebration piece, it's a big incentive for our students.
Absolutely.
Not to promote, but Amazon will be your best friend to many of these projects.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And you touched on this a little bit, actually. I think it was you, Anna, who touched on this a little bit. Is there a way for the completely beginner Spanish 1 freshman, non-heritage learner, novice, starting at novice low and hoping to be at novice mid by the end of the year, to participate in a scaled down version of the same project? Is it a different set of language learning goals and so on?
Yes. So yeah. So it would be, if you want to add, Luz, but it would be, again, they will be depending on where they are in that proficiency scale. So in this case, we're talking about novice. We would look at what can they do at that novice level and where we want them to be at the end of the unit. So we would look at those can-do statements, and their driving question will be a little bit more, we would bring it to that level also, of that novice proficiency scale. Luz, if you want to add to.
Yeah, I didn't teach level ones and two this year, but in years priors, I have had my students also participate in the festival, my level ones and twos.
Mhm,
But they would do small, short mini stories, right? Like one
mhm.
sentence stories, and they would showcase their product. They wouldn't have to present, but their product would be there, their written piece would be there for the community to see. And again, it's them being part of the festival because they're part of our community. And it's like an incentive. Hey, when you get to Spanish 3, you get to be part of the big expo. So it's
Mhm.
also just intriguing them and giving them that hype to want
And
to
really,
continue on.
sorry to cut you off.
It's okay.
Really understanding, right, what are the proficiency ranges at which your students are functioning, and then tailoring the tasks to those that they can be successful at. So Luz, you referred to that specifically, like this idea of they're going to do really short mini stories that are only one sentence long, and those stories, those sentences are probably built on sentence frames where they only had to add one or two words,
Mhm.
or they are memorized chunks of language that they understand well and can use to talk about a very kind of narrow, pertinent aspect of this for themselves, their experiences, their families, and their lives.
Mhm.
Uh, that ends up being a huge factor in tailoring work like this to different classes whose students' proficiency ranges are different. And on this next slide, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the components of high quality project-based language learning. And starting with, which ones would you say were the most successfully integrated into this project? So I think you have this animated. Would you like me to click once or twice for you?
You can click on all of them.
Click all of them. Got it. I'm going right now. Here we go. And
Yep.
then, yes, because then I ask you kind of like which ones were the most successful and why, like what made it successful, and which ones proved to be the most challenging and why.
I definitely have to say authenticity has been the most successful, the public product piece of these two projects. The whole fact of having their work be part of an audience and someone else is coming in and someone else is going to evaluate and speak to you and want to know more about what you learned and what you discovered in this process. That I feel it is huge. And this year, more than any other year, that piece what played out to be huge, especially coming from distance learning and knowing that our students needed that soothing encouragement to be able to go out and see others and speak to others. So the authenticity and the public product were huge, definitely. And of course the inquiry piece, because it's not just here you go. What do you need for them to tell me? Tell me what I need to do. It's like no, you need to be inquiring every day, asking and wondering where you are. That's what I think. Yeah, Anna, what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would also add, especially for these two, collaboration was is a big thing for both of them. So especially for the Dia de los Muertos one, where they are expected to all participate in the building of. We again make it for that we have either time slots, we have work time during the period, they can come after school. But this idea of the collaboration, and then of course, like Luz mentioned, the authenticity of both projects, we always try to make it as authentic and purposeful for them so that they could really connect, and not ask why are we doing this, but for them to really see the value in what they're doing. And not wait to say, oh, when you graduate from high school, when you enter the real world, for them to really know that their world is right now. Their world is to be students. Their world is, whatever in addition to, especially this year that Luz mentioned right now, that we came back from the pandemic where it's been hard. It's been hard, where their attention was all over the place or just fully connected to either their technology. So trying to make it really purposeful for them to really see the value in the information we give to them. Because I always tell them I can't compete against your cell phone unless I have like TikTok all over my face. It will be very hard for me to be, interesting to you, but the more authentic and the more purposeful, the more connections, the more conversations we have, it helps for them to be fully in it and invested in our projects.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, had to get my microphone to come back up. And there was another question in the chat, but I think with your permission, if we share the slide deck when we send out the email with the recording, the question was, could you share those sentence starters again, the document that had the, like with the interpretive reading and the conversation starters.
Yes.
But if we send out the slide deck, everybody will have access to all the resources throughout the entire presentation today.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the judges you invited to the food project? Were they from the community? Were they experts, for instance, food critics, chefs, and so on? I know they spoke Spanish. I remember that.
So we try to make it that it's our staff. So it could be counselors, student advisors. We have our kitchen staff come in also, and we also invite the parents. So it's a little bit of mix of everyone.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, we're going to segue. And as I mentioned earlier, we focused a lot on giving that time for that introduction of these high quality project-based language learning experiences. We're going to start digging into how Universal Design for Learning was an intentional piece in really supporting learners and fostering their success and their expert learning. Start that tonight, and we will continue that next week. So we had that really brief general statement about UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, earlier on this evening. Here are some additional kind of assumptions and beliefs, and credit to diveintoudl.com, where I adapted these from. One of the things I had mentioned early on, that one of the things that instructors do when they are designing learning experiences is they really focus on predictable variability, which also means predictable barriers to student learning. And so one of the assumptions and beliefs of UDL is that the barriers are not the student. The student is not the barrier. The barriers are embedded. The barriers are layered throughout the kinds of things students are encountering and working with. And they are usually a function of the design of, for example, the design of a textbook, the design of the curriculum, the design of a task. There are barriers that we can predict and address in our work. And another assumption that really grounds the work in UDL is that learners, in addition to needing learning to be designed to address those barriers kind of preemptively, learners also need options and choice. And we expect the variability that learners bring, and we embrace and welcome that variability. I'm going to go back, in fact, to the barriers being embedded and layered, and give you an example that is often used to provide some initial conversations around what UDL is, and that's the idea of curb cuts. So curb cuts are those portions in a sidewalk that are cut down to be the same level as the road, so that it is easier, for example, for people in a wheelchair to move from the sidewalk into the intersection to cross the street without having to fall off of a curb. But it turns out when we put something in place to address the needs of people who might be in wheelchairs, we are also making it better and easier and more accessible for a variety of other people. People on bikes, I'm gonna sneeze, sorry. People on skates or skateboards, people who all of a sudden, people who have to drag or carry a cart or a bag behind them. Like that curb cut, while it helps, it was designed for a particular need that was predictable, it also helps everybody else as well. And that's kind of the goal in education. How can we predict what barriers are there for people's specific and predictable needs, address those in our design, and in doing so, make the learning experience more successful for all learners. And so developing learner expertise is a right of all students. They all have the right to become an expert learner in each course and subject. And that it is important for teachers and instructors to separate learning goals from skill goals, and doing so supports all learners. And what I mean by that is sometimes, for example, the learning goal might be to, I'm going to make a really simple one, might be to demonstrate understanding of what they read. But the task that a teacher has to do that in any subject, science, world languages, history, and so on, requires them to write in order to do so. So now we're muddling two goals. Are we really looking at their reading comprehension, or are we looking at their writing? But if we give them choice, as it says in number 2, if there are multiple ways for them to demonstrate their understanding, whether it be drawing, recording an audio, making a video, or writing, then every learner can achieve the learning goal of being able to demonstrate that they understand what they read and can interpret what they read in this particular document. So those are some kind of assumptions and beliefs that ground UDL. And many of you may have seen this, a version of this graphic, if not this exact one, but Universal Design for Learning, beyond those beliefs and assumptions, is then broken into these guidelines. The green column is engagement, and I couldn't quite fit the whole thing in. It's actually missing the lower row, but multiple means of engagement, the why of learning. And that's, as you go down, you'll see that it's the first row across, the green, the purple, and the blue, is how learners access content in each of these 3 ways. How they build knowledge and build skills is the second row. And then the third row that you can't see yet is how they internalize and express their learning and knowledge in that content. So the engagement piece, providing multiple means of engagement, ensures that students are interested, that they have strategies for sustaining their own effort and persistence. The center column.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Shush. The center column, multiple means of representation, is the what of learning. How do we make sure students have access to the content, whether it is for some of those predictable needs around customizing how the information is displayed, offering alternatives for spoken language, or alternatives for things that are just written for students who need to hear it, clarifying vocabulary, and so on. And the third column, multiple means of action and expression, is how students demonstrate their learning and interact with the learning when they're first accessing it. So how do they not just respond, but how do they navigate the new experiences? How do they communicate their new skills and understanding to others, and so on? So the final rows that you couldn't see on the previous slide still continue those columns of engagement, representation, action, and expression, with additional checkpoints, or what all those bullets are called. And the goal at the very bottom, the goal of the entire engagement column, is expert learners who are purposeful and motivated to learn and to keep learning. The goal of the representation column and all of its checkpoints for what students are learning and providing multiple means of representation is expert learners who are resourceful and knowledgeable. And the goal of the action and expression column, the how of learning, is students who are expert learners who are strategic and goal directed. I don't think I had anything else I wanted to say on those particular ones, but let me check our Q&A really quickly, and then we're going to turn it back over to our experts, because I have some questions prepared for them related to this. What is the number on this table? Oh, you know what? Hold on, let me look back on the previous slide. 7, 1, 4, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. Yes. They are numbered. There's 9 of them. And so it's just, I can't remember why they're numbered in the way that they are, because they don't always, like 1, 2, and 3 in the middle. And then 4, 5, and 6 are on the right. Oops. And then 7, 8, and 9 are the column on the left. I can't remember why 1, 2, and 3 start in the middle. I should know that, but I don't remember. So let me get rid of that box for you. Perfect. All right. So turning back to our experts in the room, because they've done an incredible amount of work and developed this expertise that's fairly unique, where they actually embed UDL within their project-based language learning. So remember that in UDL, we're really addressing learner variability. This goes back to the question we had earlier, because it includes students with special needs. they're giving learners, you probably saw when we saw the assumptions, you could think through the projects and think about opportunities learners had for voice and choice. You could see how there were scaffolds and supports built in based on needs that were predictable to the teachers. So I think our attendees would love to hear more about how each of you use UDL to guide your lesson design in general. And Luz, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yes. The one thing I love about UDL is just that, just being able to know the barriers and be able to design around those barriers so that as we're going, we design our craft to meet those needs. So definitely getting to know our students first and foremost, just getting to know them from the beginning, getting to know who they are, what they bring, and going from there. Giving them choices. This year, coming back from distance learning and just knowing that many of our students weren't open to speaking. You know, it was hard before, but now the difficulty just quadrupled to the 100 power. But just also being at ease and really making sure that they have a chance to know themselves and self-reflect, and starting with mindfulness and starting with the here and the now, getting them in a place of calm was huge, right? And me knowing that as I was coming in back in August, right? Knowing that I am scared of what I'm going to face after being away for 18 months. What are my students going to bring? Because my student in 2021, it's not the student I left in 2020. It's a very different student, very different. So designing my lesson around that, right? My students with the speech, I had a couple of students with the speech impediment. Well, even though there's a speech impediment, there's not a communication. You can still communicate. So let me design, you can still identify the products. I know you can. So these are the different options that you have for you to show me. There's an iPad, here is the writing piece, the visuals. So just being open to always having a plethora of like a buffet, right? Because this is what it is. We're serving our students and having a buffet for you to show me and for me to know that you're moving on in proficiency. So that is what I really like about the designing my lessons with that framework in mind, and just knowing my students, what's my classroom profile, what am I expecting for them to bring, and then move from there, right? Anna mentioned the cell phone, right? Motivation, sustaining their effort and their motivation. How can we do that when most of our students this year definitely was so hard to motivate them? How do we get them out of that state of just bored, I'm bored, I don't want to hear, let me just go to my phone because this is more reassuring to me? Well, all these different activities worked, and the journal writing and the mindfulness and the being here in the present and the breathing, all of those things, although they're not language, they're a practice that, and done in the language, can reap great benefits. So getting them here, so now we can talk about curriculum and talk about our projects. So that to me has been definitely worked this year for sure. And the whole having a menu of options for every student.
Thank you. I just realized I figured out why the center column is the 1, 2, 3. So one of the other interesting things about UDL is it's based on neuroscience or brain science. And so you start with, I forgot all the names of all the regions, but essentially you start with the back of the brain. Mm-hmm. So customizing the display of information, because if they can't see it or understand it or take it in, nothing you do in the green or the blue column is going to matter, right? Mm-hmm. Same with the clarifying vocabulary and symbols and so on. So that's starting at the back. Then, oh no, it's not going in the order. Nope, never mind. I thought it was, but now I realized it's not. Nope, I still don't know why they're numbered that way. But the brain images on the top are an important piece of how this works, because you move from the back of the brain, which is the part on the right, towards the middle of the brain, and then the action and expression and the ability of students to really have those executive functions and take charge of their own learning. Well, that's the part of the brain that develops last. That's that thing we hear about, the frontal lobe, where, you know, when you ask teenagers, why did you do that? And they answer, I don't know. They're not kidding. They really don't know. Their frontal lobe is not developed. So there's brain science also behind all of this. Anna, I didn't give you a chance if there was anything that you would like to add about why you've made this purposeful and intentional choice to use UDL in the design of your high quality project-based language learning experiences.
I think it also connects to why we decided to combine the Spanish 3 and the Heritage Speakers class, because our intent was what one has, the other one will support, and what that other one has, they will support the other. So again, thinking of what are those barriers that we're gonna come across and how can we better support them? And we know that in a way, we're thinking of it as, so UDL is kind of like our fishnet, for lack of a better term, that we want to put our fishnet out there and catch as many fish as we can and support as many kids through these supports, these guidelines, so that we really understand we go in there thinking like, and understanding what's our class profile, knowing that what their level is, where are they coming from, what are the different, it's from Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, Las Filipinas, all these different countries that we have, all these different, we try to do, different questions at the beginning to understand what their background is a little bit, so that they can fully support. And I feel like these guidelines really support that net that we want to put out there, so that we could better support our students.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're also speaking to something that it turned out there was a question asked in the chat around how do you support the needs of the range of needs and the range of proficiency levels that is always present in heritage courses, right? And I think if you'd like to add a couple more details about that, but I think using UDL actually really gets to that, and that also that sense of what we get from ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, around interpretive, for example, like modifying the task, not the text, right? That's another way. But if there's anything else that you both would like to add in terms of really making sure that the learning works and helps kind of keep that forward momentum and progress going for our heritage speakers, regardless of what range of proficiency they're operating at when they come to you.
It's definitely just being open to being able to work with others and giving them those strategies for them to open up. Because with our combined class, definitely is just having them work with the Spanish 3, having the heritage work with the Spanish 3 and vice versa, is just giving them a chance to be able to open up. And that makes a whole difference. And that taps into their motivation, and that taps into their coping strategies, and that taps into their engagement overall, just being present. If you are here and present, then you engage. So let's work on getting you there. Why are you here? Right? And having that in mind, especially coming in and this year as we move forward, still keeping that in mind. When I come back in August, I'm going to see you are here, be here. Your presence is important. No distraction, your presence is important. And all the activities that I do are designed around that idea. Your presence is important. And once we go from there, then now we can move. Now we can make sure that all our proficiency levels are being tapped into. The combination of the two classes is an excellent way of tapping to a diverse levels, because the Spanish 3 is easier to read, and their interpretive proficiency is a little higher than possibly our heritage speaker, who can not really read possibly interpretive, but they can understand a little more, and perhaps they can speak a little more, and they combine and they learn from each other. And keeping those variables in mind as we design everyday activity, it works.
Absolutely. So as I said, as we get ready to wrap up, we're going to dive more deeply into the guidelines. And today we're going to start with engagement. And as we can see on the graphic, what we're really working to do is ensure that we support learners to engage with the content, but also remain engaged and really become learners who can continue to commit to the work that it's taking to learn these new skills, learn this new content, learn this new information, develop their speaking skills, and so on. And so this goes to the why of learning. So Anna, what are some things you do in PBLL that provide options for recruiting learners' interest?
Yeah, so and this kind of connects to where you were talking about right now, that we try to have and give them different options. So again, so that we don't set them up for failure, we want to set them up for success. So they have the different options of how Luz mentioned right now, of if they cannot communicate one way, we'll find a way for them to communicate in another. So we try to provide those sentence frames. We try to provide videos. We try to provide vocabulary. We do I can't think of the word right now, but we give them a Google Doc where they will have access to videos, they will have access to infographics, and then we'll ask them a series of questions, and then we'll do different forms of them for them to respond. So they could either do it through a recording, and Luz mentioned that we use Canvas. We also use apps like Flipgrid, where they have that opportunity to listen to each other and give each other feedback through those different types of through those different types of apps. We also allow them to go back to, sometimes we allow them to pick their own groups for those people that they feel more comfortable with, the people that they're used to working with. I mentioned it earlier that we give them that opportunity of also working on their own, if need be. So we give them these different options. And then of course the authenticity part, we try to make it as much as we can connected to them. And then if we jump into, like, for example, AP, where we talk about the United Nations and their sustainable goals, and how those connect to us and our community. So we do, as we always try to give them as much support, but knowing that what they're doing is for them and for a greater good for their community. And then how do we go ahead and minimize those threats or distractions that they may have? We think about that class, that what are those what is the class that we're working with? What are these barriers that they're bringing? So we try to support them as much as we can. We try to have, if they're working on an activity, we try to set different for example, will be, if they already know that if they're working on an activity, for example, they have the structure of, we're always working with a timer, so that they feel that security of, there's a structure that I know I'm following. So we're working with timers. I love playing music in my class. So I play different music. They'll request songs, and I ask them, is it appropriate? Yes. Okay, cool. We'll play that song. So try to be as caring and loving, so that they could feel the support and that they feel that that we're there for them, and we're here to serve them more than anything, and minimize that outside noise, their home, their whatever is going on, and being able to support as best as we can.
And Anna, I would like to add also one big one this year for distraction, right? The cell phone. And although we don't have a cell phone policy at our school, just putting it on them. And one thing I implemented this year was reflecting on a month, just every day reflecting at the end of the week. How was your cell phone use today? Right? Just give me out of 3, right? bien, más o menos, or no muy bien, right? Good, very well,
Yeah.
not. And just give me a sense. Were you present or were you distracted? Tell me. And then at the end of the week, turn that in, right? It's not an assessment, but it's just really you sharing. How did you do this week? And surprisingly, many of them found this to be surprising for themselves. Like,
Yeah.
wow, this week, I was having a breakup and I was on my phone the whole day because I was going back and forth. Well, good. Now, what can you do next time? And these are little moments through the day where you can just do a one-on-one engagement with the student that makes the world of a difference. That
Mhm.
in itself, it's already getting them interested in having a relationship with the class and being
Absolutely.
present. So I found that to be very, very worthwhile. Little notes, just a calendar, right? Just a calendar that they can just paste on their notebook and just at the
Mhm.
last 5 minutes, hey, take out your calendar, tell me, let me know how you did
How did
today.
it go today?
How did it
Yeah.
go today? How was your presence today? And using this language of presence, of we value presence and connection. We don't look for distractions in this class. How are you today on that? Tell me.
Yeah.
And just
Which
talking.
goes, which we'll talk, one of our last questions, we'll talk about self-regulation, but those two match up really nicely.
Mhm.
High quality project-based language learning, it turns out it doesn't wrap up neatly in a one-day lesson, right? Or even a week. So for some students, attuning to one topic and really digging into it, exploring it, pulling out new understandings, and then producing content for a real audience takes a much longer amount of time than maybe they normally invest in other kinds of work they do in their classes. So, Luz, what would you say has been the most impactful way you have helped learners sustain their effort and persistence during project-based language learning?
It's definitely the everyday intentions. That has to be it. It's just setting those intentions for every day and knowing that every day what you do is tied to to something bigger. And that's how you would imagine with the Dia de Muertos, right? How can that go on for weeks and weeks? Like by the end, aren't they tired of Pan de Muerto or aren't they tired? It's like, no, because there's so much in it and every day there's a focus. So bringing them, going back to that whole brain, right? When they come in, it's like, why are you here? What is the focus for today? Come in, let's reflect, let's focus, let's be present. And now the focus is this. And we're tapping until everyone's different styles or students are all different. They come in with different curiosities and different interests and just they're all different, unique. And knowing that what we offer today, hey, it might be of great interest to you. So stay tuned, right? The artist, the scientist, talk about food safety. I mean, you want to talk about bacteria and let's talk about how that grows in a meat that's stuck in your backpack for days. How about let's look at that? Hey, let's look up a video. And just those everyday intentions is what keeps them engaged throughout a long unit.
Mhm.
It
And
doesn't.
knowing that they have that authentic outcome coming and that you've built in, both of you've both built in opportunities for the learners to have a great deal of say and agency in how they are going to work, what they are working on, what the outcome is going to be. And there's a huge range. If you look at the second bullet under sustaining effort and persistence, there's a huge range of the types of tasks and skills that students need to show over the course of the entire project-based language learning experience. So that's varying those demands and resources so that there's kind of that give and take where it gets a little more intense for a bit, but then there's going to be another piece where it kind of eases off and they can get back into regulating themselves and so on.
Mm-hmm. I can think specifically during the phases of the project. So the initial phase is a lot of input, a lot of comprehension, and during the middle phase, we're starting to get more of the action. The final phase, we can relax a little, but yet it's still coming to an end. So it's almost like it's this dance of back and forth, and it doesn't get monotonous because there is a rhythm, and that having rhythm is safe, it's predictable, and it's also curious. Like it's not boring. Like it's it's safe, but not boring. I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah. No, I get it's not so routine that students are like, well, I know exactly everything that's going to happen today. And if I don't love it, I just have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
With something as authentic and open-ended as high quality project-based language learning, there might be hurdles and challenges that weren't anticipated. How do you support learners' self-regulation through the PBLL experience, Anna?
So I would say that we tried, and this again, I feel like they're all connected. We try to make them feel as we try to understand that profile, make them feel supported, and we do activities such as, obviously we do self-reflections. At the beginning of class, we do a lot of mindfulness. Where we reflect on our breathing, we reflect on our movement. And this is like the first 5-10 minutes of class. We try to do a variation. One week we'll do mindfulness, the next week we'll do journals. Journals they could be a check-in of, how do you feel today? How was your morning? What are we thankful for? Sometimes we'll ask questions that are connected to the projects. So for example, if we talk about, when we're talking about Dia de los Muertos, how can we not talk about Coco, the movie? So we'll bring that in and ask them like, oh, who've seen the movie? So we have these types of self-reflection, self-activities. We'll do the mini workshops that we do throughout the projects to kind of support and what they need help on. We'll talk to them one-on-one. Some students, we take them outside and have those conversations outside. We'll have mini conferences after school. Can I present after school? Yes, come and present after school, come and present during lunch. So we give them the opportunity for them to feel comfortable in our classroom and understand that their voice matters no matter how they want to share it out. And just make them feel that they belong in our classroom, they belong in their community, and room 502, that they're part of that community, that they're part of James Lick, that they're part of San Jose, part of California, part of the United States, and part of the world, and that they make a difference through these activities that we do.
Thank you. If we're very close to the end, so I'm going to kind of go to the last question. If you were to do these UDL embedded PBLLs over again, and I think you probably will, since I know these are ones you've been honing and using, what is one lesson you've learned when it comes to providing specifically these multiple means of engagement?
Yes, I can answer. Definitely is being specific, not taking it all in at once, and just knowing that it is okay, and just not being hard on myself. Like, I need to have every student engaged right now, because if one student is not engaged, this is over and this is done. So it's just keeping that cool and knowing that although I'm there as an educator to help my students, I need to help myself first. Right, help myself first and be in a place where I can best meet my student where they are. What type of educator do they need today? What is it that they need? They need me, but how do they need me? And I think when engaging our students, it's engaging ourselves first before walking into the building. Like, how am I doing today? What are we doing today? How am I feeling? How am I showing up to my students today? And then that really gets me in a frame of being able to engage everyone, right? To being able to try and to really attempt. And if there's a student who is not, then we can intentionally see what are those resources that I can refer you to and those interventions that are needed outside of this classroom. Because we're doing everything, right? And we do it what I can to help you. But if it's not, what can we do? But know that there is a support for you. If it's not here, there is. I always tell them that too, right? I don't have the answer for everything, but if I don't have the answer, I will help you. So share, come. So just getting them in that space and getting myself there first before reaching my students. So as I move forward with these units in the years to come, because this year was really challenging and we can only predict, right, when the variables coming forward, that it's going to continue to be challenging, but it will make a world of a difference if we change our mindset to be more, to include more UDL and more intentional designs in our lessons.
Thank you. And there was a question, if you could, either of you can answer just really quickly, because I don't think there's one set answer to this. Projects take quite a long time, right? These project-based language learning experiences. So how much time do you give students each class session to work on the various components of the project?
So it depends on the phase, right, Anna? It's just the phase of the project. But the initial, we think of it initial phase, mid phase, and final phase. So the initial phase, more of the project, it's during the middle, final phase. The initial, it's a lot of the getting their interest, giving them choices, getting them to think about how they can show their learning of the concepts at first, and then towards the middle, since we are only 55 minutes, let's say, in a given week, we'll give them half of the class to work on the project. First we come in together as a class, the last half of the class you go into your teams, and that's how we do that dance of back and forth. Come together, go to your teams, now come back together. It works really nicely. I love the PBL dance.
And I think it's also thinking about what we said earlier, that we have to think of that end goal in mind as we are planning, because most of our projects are not like months long. Some are 2 weeks, some are 2 to 3 weeks. So we tend to do, so we are in semester, divided in semesters. So it's 18 weeks each grading period. So we tend to do about 2 to 3 projects in each semester. So we don't make them that long. At first, when we first started, right now it sounds all nice and dandy, but at first that's how you learn, trial and error, as you go. And we've kind of gotten the hang of it, of more or less projects tend to be about 2 to 3 weeks long.
Yeah. And very quickly, and last question came up, and they'll have to be very quick. Do you see these projects actually building language fluency for students?
For sure. Absolutely.
In a different way, right, than just textbook exercises.
Oh, definitely. Just have a student about food and festivities in Spanish speaking, and they'll be able to communicate that because they got that experience.
The difference between performance and proficiency.
Yeah.
And we actually see it. They're not just yes, we give them the sentence frames and they have the opportunity to practice, but it's not as it's not, what is it called, where they're just repeating.
Not just rote and regurgitation.
There you go. Yeah, that's the word. So it's actually proficiency. They're in the moment. They have access to it.
Especially there's pieces that are performance that they're prepared for, right? Because that's where they've prepared themselves, they've practiced, they've refined. But what I love about PBLL is there's also always that spontaneous proficiency aspect. When they actually go to do the culminating event, there are live people there, there's opportunities for interaction, there's questions they couldn't have predicted. And because of the careful work and the multiple experiences that these students have had and the many documents to which they've been exposed on these topics, they find themselves actually able to engage with their audience, their mentors, whoever is there, in the target language.
Yes, absolutely.
And then want to make sure we have an opportunity to continue this work, because you might have noticed we only did engagement today. So webinar 2 is next week, June 29th, same time. And we have been putting in the chat the link to the feedback for tonight's webinar. So please, please, please take a moment. I'm sure our hosts at NFLRC will put it back into the chat one more time. so that it's easy for you all to access. And that brings us to the end of part 1. But as I already said, the good news is you can join Luz and Anna again in 1 week for the second and final part of this webinar. We'll continue deepening our knowledge around UDL and specifically explore how multiple means of representation and multiple means of action and expression support high quality project-based language learning experiences. Luz and Anna, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your work, your students, and your passion with us today.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
you so much. It was a
Thank you.
pleasure. Fun.
For me as well. For me as well. And thanks again to the entire team at the NFLRC, housed at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. And please again, do complete the feedback on this webinar. That is a wrap for this evening, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Adios.